Cordell, he gives us a true versatile running back option behind Christian McCaffrey, running back, wide receiver, all that depth. That kind of trend, I'm reading that comment because it kind of transitions us into trade rumors. I was reading your article earlier. There was definitely some guys that stuck out to me while we're talking about injuries as well and depth, different guys that we would need. I wanted to start off since we're covering the Vikings game. Potentially, if the 49ers win on the plane ride home, they could just pick up Daniil Hunter and take him with them. It would be really nice if they could trade for him right now, because then they could definitely sit Trent Williams, and they wouldn't have to worry about anything. But I don't think the Vikings will do that. I was seeing that I think that the Vikings get a third round comp pick if they keep him.
Yeah,
So I think it would take a second round comp pick to get him. But the 49ers do have a first round pick finally. They have obviously picks in all the other rounds as well. He's 30 years old, so that's kind of problematic. He would not, you know, not that that's old, but for football players, something to note. Also, he would be a 1 year rental, so you'd have to pay him or let him go. However, we keep talking about, like, when we're talking about the importance of Jake Moody and maybe bringing in someone else, or Brock Purdy's accuracy, like, the 49ers made all in moves for this year. This is the year that they should be chasing the Super Bowl. Quarterback play around the league has looked really bad. Other teams have looked, uh, the 49ers have looked like either the best or one of the best teams, even with their loss against the Browns in the league. This is a year that they should be going all 100% out to win a Super Bowl. If they win it, they're not going to, it's not going to matter that it was only a 1 year rental. So, how do you feel about Daniil Hunter? He currently has 8 sacks, tied for the first in the league with TJ Watt. Looks like a really good player. And if you could get someone who's, giving that much production for only a second round pick, I actually think that's something that the 49ers would be interested in. I know they just got Randy Gregory, but I feel like the 49ers have never felt like they've had too many defensive linemen. So how do you
yeah.
feel about Hunter?
Daniil Hunter's a stud. I mean, Daniil Hunter's a very good player, and this was never like not known. In the offseason, he was floated around in trade requests and things like that, but it was primarily because of his contract situation. They were in disagreement, but the Vikings and Hunter ended up getting a contract done. The base salary is around $10 million. I would expect the team to probably, or maybe even the Vikings would be willing to pick it up if they got bigger compensation. Would probably be around a second round pick, I would assume. I don't think Daniil Hunter gets a first round pick because he's an expiring deal. He's also already 28, turning on 29. And so I don't think that going into his age 29, age 30 season, you're going to see Daniil Hunter get that much value in return. Wouldn't be surprised if he's traded. The one thing I will say, though, is I don't think it'll be the 49ers. The reason being, I think they do trust the group that they have right now. You already see Randy Gregory out snapping a guy like Drake Jackson in the defensive line room. And while the concept of going all in is important, I also think that it might be a misevaluation of resources if they're going after a guy like Daniil Hunter after they went after a guy like Randy Gregory. You didn't trade much at all for Randy Gregory. That's don't get me wrong. I mean, you traded basically a sixth round pick, or sorry, a
Yeah,
pick swap of sixth and
7.
seventh picks, and you're not paying much money at all for him. But I just don't think that they're going to look at that position, at least for a win now piece like Daniil Hunter. They might look for a smaller level piece like they did back in 2020, 2021, potentially with some team control. That's the thing I've been hinting at. And Daniil Hunter could obviously be in the cards. I just don't envision that being the move for the 49ers. I think other teams would be willing to pay more, just given that they might have a bigger need at pass rush, whereas the 49ers have 4 guys who they probably trust, well, probably even 5, including Javon Kinlaw, as a pass rusher in those defensive fronts, to where I don't think that if they acquire Daniil Hunter, I just don't think there's going to be enough room to provide the guys that they want to give snaps enough snaps.
Okay, I love that. I love that evaluation. When we're talking about maybe guys who are would be more needed on this team, then going back to the injury, I was talking about Isaiah Oliver being limited yesterday. We are crossing our fingers that he is playing in this game because once again, Ambry Thomas is the guy who comes in when he goes out, and every time Ambry Thomas has been in the game this year, he's literally immediately given up a touchdown, which is sad because he showed promise his rookie year. I feel bad. I feel like I'm picking on him just every time Like he comes on the field. I feel like as fans, we're like, why is he here, guys? What are you? Come on, we all know this. So when talking about depth in the secondary and Isaiah Oliver potentially being injured, a different guy that has been mentioned is Jalen Johnson in Chicago. He is younger. He's 24 years old, has a PFF grade, and I know that people have their opinions on PFF, but has a PFF grade of 84.1, top 10 in coverage. Can you talk to us about Jalen Johnson and maybe the probability that the 49ers could be interested in him? I've seen that he's done tryouts with multiple teams, the 49ers not being one of them yet. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about him and maybe that position being more important to get depth behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about Jalen Johnson, he's a guy who was at the top of my list just because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people pointing at Pat Surtain. I just don't think he gets moved. I think that the price is going to be too high, and I also think Denver views him as a building block and, a guy who Sean Payton doesn't seem like a guy who wants to go into a full-blown rebuild, and I think that they're going to try and build around Surtain on that defense. But other guys that they involve Jalen Johnson, and Jalen Johnson's a guy who's coming on an expiring deal. I think he's a guy who you could watch out at corner. I think corner is a position where 49ers might, just under the radar be calling in on certain people. I think Johnson's definitely going to be one, if not already. I think he's a guy who they'll definitely be interested in just because he plays that press man scheme. He's a good outside corner, and I think that for the value that he'll provide, I think that he could not only be a building block now, but also for the future. You move Lenore back into the nickel, and that's your best three corner alignment. Lenore is a good outside corner, but he's also a solid nickel, and I think the 49ers might prefer him there overall, and that might be something that they look into.
I love that. And what did you? I don't think I wrote it down. What did you say you thought it might take to get a guy like Jalen Johnson? He's younger. He's performed pretty well. I think. Oh, maybe you said they would receive a. They're expected to receive a fourth round pick if they hold on to him. So probably a third round pick at the least. Now also Philadelphia has injuries. I did see that they were looking into Buda Baker, but they could also be looking into a guy like Jalen Johnson. Dallas and Pittsburgh have also been rumored to be involved in getting him. So there might be some competition, and that could also drive up his price a little bit. But definitely would be a smarter trade prospect to go after when it comes to allocating resources than a guy like Pat Surtain. I agree with you. I don't even think that the Broncos would be open to it. But even if they would, the capital that it would take to get a guy like him just seems unrealistic right now. The 49ers are going to want to keep that first round pick. But with a guy like Jalen Johnson, it should potentially take a third
I
round
would
pick. Do you
assume
think
it
more
would
than that?
be, yeah, 2 or 3 is where my price I would assume would be. Maybe a 2, understanding that there might be a lot of suitors because he might be the best
Mm-hmm.
corner on the market. So it might be a 2, but for the 49ers, a 2 is an early 3, like a late 2, early 3. It's in the similar range. San Francisco has also shown they don't mind trading that 2. They did it obviously for the McCaffrey deal, and Johnson would be a guy who they'd probably re-up for another contract after
Yeah.
he's done.
Okay, I love that. Really quick, also, I want to I don't want to go through every guy that you mentioned, but um, offensive line, we talked about there being some injuries there. Now, obviously, the best offensive linemen in the world aren't going to be available right now. But a guy that I saw people talking about was Garrett Bowles from Denver. He's only allowed 1 sack this season so far. And he has a fairly high PFF grade of 78.8 or 72.8. So he's done pretty well in Denver, at least grading wise. Denver has just struggled overall as a team. The only problem with him is one, it's not for sure that he's up for trade. I think it might be more of a like if Denver does do like a fire sale thing where they're just trying to get rid of people and start rebuilding. Also, he does make $16 million next year, which
Yeah.
could affect re-signing Ayuk. Now, the 49ers, I don't really understand exactly how this works because math was not, I studied psychology in school. So after stats, I just never looked at any sort of math equation ever. But don't the 49ers have like $41 million in cap right now?
Yeah, they got
So I
about
feel like
42 million.
they should be able to sign Ayuk and get this guy if they wanted. Now, I don't know if the guy's worth it, but how do you feel about Garrett Bowles? Would that affect Ayuk? Do you think the 49ers are interested in that? Or do you think at this point in the season, even though maybe they don't have the best offensive line, I think sometimes people talk about like the offensive line meshing together and over time they get better. So maybe they don't want to add someone mid-season. What's your feelings on adding an offensive lineman, and do you have anyone that you've been looking out for?
Yeah, I think adding an offensive lineman, I think Garrett Bowles would be interesting. I do have a few concerns. One is the one that you mentioned. I mean, the money. He's owed 14 million, or sorry, his cap hit this year is 17.8 million. The base salary is around 13.75 million, and so he's owed a good amount of money. He's also owed 16 million next year, which is the final year of his deal. He's going into his age 32 season next year, and the money is not guaranteed. So, I mean, it's a non-guaranteed contract, but that usually means that you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to extend him. You're going to have to restructure that deal or something like that. As for the 42 million in cap space, I mean, the 49ers have a ton of cap space, but the reason they had a ton of cap space is because they're positioning themselves for next season, where you're going to not only have to deal with the Ayuk extension at some point, which could also lower his cap hit because he's on a fifth-year option, but they have 42 million in cap space right now. That goes to zero. They're over the cap so much that it goes to near zero when you start next year. And I mean, the restructures and stuff can kick in and things like that, but it's because Nick Bosa's contract and other contracts who you've already restructured do significantly increase. And so I don't know if the 49ers can necessarily afford it unless they continue to push money back in the future, which is a possibility. But I think Bowles is interesting in that he provides you a tackle option. The one other thing, though, is it's very hard to integrate offensive linemen in the middle of the season, and especially in a scheme like the Shanahan scheme. And he's played on the left side throughout his career. He hasn't played right tackle, and
Okay. Yeah.
he'd have to move him to right tackle because you're not moving Trent. And so,
Yeah.
that's something that he'd have to consider. Would he be willing to play right tackle after playing left for so long? I mean, he's going to be traded, so I don't know if he necessarily has a choice. But that's another thing where you'd probably want to have that conversation if he'd go to right tackle.
Okay, perfect. Do you have any offensive linemen besides him that you've been keeping your eye on, or do you think that keeping that congruency within the guys that they currently have is probably just the best bet for the 49ers this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think a guy who I think you could think about is Andre Dillard. He hasn't played well. He hasn't played that well in Tennessee. He got benched recently. But if you're talking about an offensive tackle, he might be a slight upgrade over Colton McKivitz, and he might also not be that expensive. You're trying to look for bargains and things like that. If I was to be a betting man, I don't think they make a single move on the offensive line. But Dillard's a guy who you could go after. He has 2 years left on his deal. 9.5 million next year, 12 million in cap the year after that. But not as many, not much guarantees. Only 1 million total of that total money is guaranteed. He's an option, but I don't think the 49ers go at it. I think they might maybe entertain it, but I also don't know if the upgrade is good enough to where you warrant trading away trading away a piece when you're likely going to cut him after the year.
Okay, that's I agree with that. I think that it's probably because I was looking at guys like Lyle Collins and stuff, but coming off all those injuries with the
Yeah.
49er injury luck, it just seems not smart. I feel like sticking with the guys that they have right now, if hopefully those two ankle injuries from yesterday weren't that big of a deal, is probably the 49ers' best bet. Um, I know that some people were talking about linebackers. There's Frankie. I don't know how to say his last name. Lou.
Frankie Louvu.
Yeah.
Hmm.
He's 27 years old. He has 27 tackles, 4 sacks, and he's a free agent at the end of the season, so it would be a rental. Now he does have familiarity with Steve Wilkes. I think if Greenlaw's able to play, that this isn't even something that they really consider. But I just feel like the absence of Greenlaw was felt so much. Oren Burks is a great player, but I think he's a little bit more suited for special teams. There was a lot of missed tackles and just not tackling as hard as when you have a guy like Dre Greenlaw. Now I don't know if bringing a guy like Frankie in is going to totally replace that. So I think fans should more just be hopeful that Dre Greenlaw is good and they could potentially be bringing in a guy like Frankie for backup. But I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think if they are looking for a guy, it's going to be more just that Jalen Johnson corner position. But did you have any thoughts on Frankie and on the 49ers potentially bringing him in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at that move, I think that you want to look at linebackers who I don't think that they're going to impact you as much this season, but you want to look at linebackers who kind of impact you a lot in the future. And so Frankie Louvu might be one of those guys, but he's a guy who's an unrestricted free agent, and I mean his salary isn't high. You know, if the cost is cheap, maybe you go ahead and make the move. He's your number three, but I don't know if they're going to go ahead and trade for a linebacker that is on an expiring contract, understanding they probably won't have the resources to sign him back in the offseason. So that's the way that I'm looking at it. Want to give a shout out to my guy Chris. Always appreciate
Yeah,
him. But
I just saw
yeah,
that.
but that's my thoughts. He's a young guy. He's a solid player, but I just don't know if San Francisco is the best fit. Understanding he won't have as big of a role, and it's not a guy who you can necessarily groom for the future potentially once Greenlaw leaves.
I completely agree. And Chris, we gotta shout out him because I love him so much. He's been so helpful and pivotal. He's the only reason why I'm currently doing this because he's been so helpful. But he said that Burks has been playing extremely well, and he's not just a special teams guy. So maybe I need to fix my expectations a little bit. I think it's probably just unfair also that I'm comparing someone to Greenlaw. I just really feel like he puts the fear in other teams. Like I think he genuinely dissuades people from wanting to run the ball. So, uh, but I agree. I don't think if the 49ers were going to spend resources before the trade deadline, I think it will be on a guy like Jalen Johnson. I think that would be their smartest bet is fortifying that corner uh, secondary position. That way, we're not relying on Ambry Thomas.